Despite all the craziness of this last year, few incidents have been more universally vilified, damaging, and just plain embarrassing for the United States than the 28-point peace plan for Ukraine. Why exactly? Well, over the course of the last few weeks, this endeavor has definitively demonstrated whose side the administration and Trump's inner circle are on. Spoiler alert, it's the Russian side. And the negotiations have been plagued by incompetence, scandal, and outright lies since before the plan became public. Welcome to the inaugural episode of the Ukraine Brief. Let's get into it. On October 25th, there was a meeting in Miami between three individuals: Jared Kushner, Trump-designated Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, and Putin's personal envoy Kirill Dmitriev. To get a fuller sense of the insanity to come, we have to establish a bit of background on each of these men. Jared Kushner is Trump's son-in-law and served as his senior advisor from 2017 to 2021. He was generally presented as POTUS's lead dealmaker for Middle Eastern and Israel-related affairs and has well-established private equity ties due to his being born into an immensely powerful family of Orthodox Jewish New York real estate moguls. Kushner himself has been the subject of repeated controversy in both his private equity dealings and in POTUS's political orbit, mostly concerned with him not reporting secret political meetings, contacts, and business dealings in China, Russia, and the Middle East. We have to keep moving, but the Kushner family story is truly wild and worth the 2-minute read. Check the link in the description for more details. Steve Witkoff is, wouldn't you know it, a Jewish lawyer turned real estate mogul with billions in estimated net worth and considerable assets in the Middle East. A longtime friend of Trump, he has also been the subject of significant controversy in both business and political roles, and he has an established reputation as a parrot of Kremlin narratives. Kirill Dmitriev is a Russian businessman and member of Putin's inner circle. Known as Putin's Trump whisperer, he previously graduated from Harvard and worked for Goldman Sachs, and is currently sanctioned by many countries for his role in managing massive illegal slush funds for the Kremlin. Dmitriev is also likely the reason that many of our biggest banks started opening the door to more trade with Russia in March 2025. These three men spent several weeks in late October and early November developing a so-called peace deal framework. However, as you, astute viewer, have already likely noticed, none of these men have actual diplomatic roles or experience. While special envoy appointments are not unusual in and of themselves, envoys are typically selected from former ambassadors, senior national security officials, or subject matter experts in the relevant field. They are not usually family members, close friends, or campaign donors. To make matters worse, Kushner and Witkoff have vast swaths of their considerable assets based in the Middle East, which is probably why Kushner was one of the first to publicly present the idea to turn the Gaza Strip into another Trump Tower development deal, and this presented obvious concerns over the conflicts of interest in any diplomatic role. It's important that we're clear here. The fact that Witkoff and Kushner have been chosen to spearhead the US-Ukraine effort here points to the following. Number one, the president values loyalty and only loyalty, and has repeatedly chosen to prioritize obedience over relevant expertise, knowledge, skills, or any form of established career history. This is textbook nepotism. The president wants to sideline the State Department and all other traditional diplomatic institutions. Special envoys do not require any vetting or approval from the House or Senate and report directly to the president. Institutions are important because a government cannot be run like a business, and it's disturbing that so much is happening on secret calls and behind doors that are closed to the core diplomatic personnel within our own government. Point number three, the president is trusting two controversial businessmen to solve the unsolvable because he apparently thinks that you can make a deal with a dictator who invaded a sovereign nation and has shown no indication of wanting to leave or negotiate at all, let alone in good faith. Around November 18th, news outlets started to get wind of the U.S. plan for peace. The next day, it was widely reported that Trump expected Ukraine to surrender its territory for undefined, quote, security guarantees. When Zelensky asked to include European partners in these negotiations, Witkoff canceled a scheduled meeting in Turkey, and the U.S. position became, quote, Zelensky can come to Washington to discuss the new U.S. plan if he wants to. On November 22nd, Secretary Rubio wrote on X that the 28-point peace plan was co-authored by the U.S. and Russia. However, hours later, Reuters reported that Rubio himself had called several U.S. senators saying, quote, we are the recipients of a proposal that was delivered to one of our representatives. It is not a recommendation, and it is not our plan. Several outlets quoted Republican Mike Rounds, who said, quote, this administration was not responsible for this release in its current form. It looked more like it was written in Russian to begin with. End quote. This podcast agrees, as the original 28 points do read like an okay translation from Russian to English and include several phrases that would never be said or written by any native English speakers. On Sunday, November 23rd, the full text of the framework was revealed to be Putin's 28-point Christmas list, and more one-sided than a movie screen. An unnamed source claimed that Secretary Rubio was, quote, read in at every step of this dubious development, and that points were a joint effort by both a U.S. and Russian team, despite the fact that Rubio himself had already contradicted this information, albeit in private. The free world was outraged, and rightly so. The 28 points included handing over territory that Russia had never touched, full amnesty for all Russian war crimes and anything else the Russian government has done since the Soviet Union fell, a reduced Ukrainian military, and restoring Russia's access to global trade, finance, and politics, as well as other obviously Kremlin-generated carrots. Rubio then flew to Geneva to begin talks with Ukrainian and EU representatives. Trump, frustrated that the Ukrainian pushback to this abomination, doubled down on the lie, insisting that the framework was a joint effort, and set a Thanksgiving deadline for Zelensky's signature, threatening to withdraw U.S. support and intelligence should the framework not be accepted as is within T-minus 3 days and change. The very next day, November 25th, Bloomberg published a transcript from an October 14th call between Witkoff and Kremlin advisor Yuri Ushakov, where Witkoff coaches Ushakov on how to best sell the Russian version of a deal to Trump. Spoiler alert, and includes a lot of brown-nosing. Side note, remember back in October when Trump was ready to send Tomahawks to Ukraine? Well, from that same transcript, it also became apparent that Witkoff had pushed to arrange the unexpected October 17th Trump-Putin phone call that caused Trump to 180 on that decision entirely. That alone is disgraceful, yet another example of the United States of America bending over and spreading for Putin on the world stage. But back to November. Republicans, Democrats, and our allies everywhere were disgusted by this development. Witkoff was labeled as a traitor, some Republican lawmakers threatened to resign in protest, and others still called for him to be fired. In response, Trump tripled down on the lie and defended Witkoff, saying, quote, "That's a standard thing. He's got to sell this to Ukraine. He's got to sell Ukraine to Russia. That's what a deal maker does. I haven't heard it." It, in this case, being the content of the transcript that he's being asked about, quote, "And I would imagine he's saying the same thing to Ukraine because each party has to give and take," end quote. If only Trump, Witkoff, Hegseth, or any of the rest of them could name a single thing that Russia has to give instead of take, perhaps these so-called negotiations would actually get somewhere. That same day, Trump announced that there had been progress in Geneva and 180'd on his Thanksgiving deadline. Quite possibly in response to this, Russia unleashed yet another mass bombardment on Kyiv, resulting in more civilian deaths. Meetings continued between the US and Ukraine, and because Russia was absent, basic common sense seemed to start appearing in the conversation. On December 5th, the State Department published a short summary of the talks' progress, writing, quote, "The American and Ukrainians also agreed on the framework of security arrangements and discussed necessary deterrence capabilities to sustain a lasting peace. Both parties agreed that real progress toward any agreement depends on Russia's readiness to show serious commitment to long-term peace, including steps towards de-escalation and the cessation of killings," end quote. Finally, the ball seemed to be in Russia's court. A day later, Putin responded by saying, quote, "Either we liberate these territories by force, or Ukrainian troops will leave these territories," end quote. It's important that we reestablish some context here. The Russian army has been trying to seize control of the Donbas region since 2014. There were many reasons for the 2014 invasion, from various gas and mineral extraction deals that Shell and Chevron had established with Ukraine in 2013, to the strategic importance of Crimea's war water ports, to Russia's general desire to turn its neighbors away from the West and cannibalize their resources. Since 2014, Russia has also tried desperately to legitimize its occupation of Ukraine's territory, just as it did in Chechnya, Georgia, and Moldova, as well as delegitimize these countries' actual governments. This is why we see so many propaganda campaigns attacking the character and legitimacy of Zelensky and other leaders that do not have Kremlin parts inside of their mouths. Russia enjoys massive support from China in the form of electronics, weapon manufacturing equipment, and piles of money from the oil and gas that Russia exports to China. Iran is arguably Russia's biggest supplier of military drones and missiles, and North Korea has done all of this and more, sending tens of thousands of men to fight in Ukraine. Despite all of this, and this point is key, Russia still cannot take the Donbas, and any gains have been both extremely marginal and described as Pyrrhic, which is fancy pants talk for coming at a cost that is so great that it is tantamount to defeat. That said, Trump seems to have rejected the evidence of his eyes, ears, and the Pentagon, and is somehow convinced that the Donbas is forever lost to Ukraine, or he's been finally essentially commanded to say that. It's likely for this reason that once everything was finally going well with the peace deal on the US and Ukraine front in late November and early December, two things happened. Number one, Putin, an authoritarian dictator with over 2 decades in the chair and a rap sheet that would make Goebbels blush, said Zelensky was an illegitimate president and therefore no agreement can be signed with him. 2. Trump once again falsely attacked Ukraine's democratic institutions, saying, quote, "They haven't had an election in a long time," and, quote, "It gets to a point when it's not a democracy anymore." Again, POTUS hasn't said a peep about the democracy in Russia or the countries that support it, such as Iran, China, North Korea, who all incidentally hate America, and once again chose to feed basic Kremlin propaganda to the American public. Therein lies the trap that was laid for Zelensky. Yet again, he'd found himself in a 2v1 where the Russian side, the side that tried to assassinate him dozens of times and invaded his country, handed him an insane list of demands that was then regurgitated by the American side, which also issues unreasonable demands, such as 3-day deadlines to change the Ukrainian constitution. However, Zelensky once again outmaneuvered both Trump and Putin by calling their bluff. He basically said, "We're ready for elections. I got my people on it. We can change the constitution and hold elections during martial law. We just need security guarantees from the US and European partners to do so." This is logical. You cannot get people, especially active servicemen and women, to leave their posts, go out and stand in line to vote when it is literally raining tyranny, not to mention the challenges associated with counting the votes for millions of Ukrainians that are either abroad or those living in occupied territories. Zelensky then said that he's ready to initiate an energy ceasefire immediately. The Russians obviously did not like this development one bit. On December 9th, one Russian Foreign Ministry ambassador said that Zelensky was manipulating the rules and setting unreasonable conditions. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitriev was a little more revealing, saying, quote, "We are working for peace, not a truce. Moscow is interested in sustainable long-term peace. That's not what Zelensky is asking for." As of the latest, Trump also seems displeased. On December 12th, Reuters reported that Trump is, quote, "sick of meetings for the sake of meeting," and has established a Christmas deadline for the peace deal. All of this inspires several important questions. Number one, why are the US and Russia so interested in Ukraine's presidential elections? In my personal opinion, the head of one Ukrainian election watchdog put it perfectly. In the opinion of these two players, it seems that they believe that there should be a new elected president who will sign certain peace documents and will be ready to accept demands that are unacceptable from the point of view of the constitutional framework of Ukraine, from the point of view of the principles of protecting territorial integrity and sovereignty. I think this hits the nail on the head, and it matches up with one of my favorite logical reverse engineering methods. Who benefits the most from Ukraine having a modern-day Neville Chamberlain as president? In this case, the Kremlin, and those close to it stand to gain the most from regime change in Kiev, just as they were the obvious winners in the original 28-point plan. So long as the US presidential administration is clearly on the Russian side, it makes sense for the Kremlin to play a longer game to squeeze Ukraine on both the literal and diplomatic fronts. Why? Because this hard-nosed strategy, known as the Gromyko Doctrine, has worked for decades. First, demand the maximum and do not hesitate to exaggerate your demands. Demand even what never belonged to you. Second, issue ultimatums. Threaten war. Do not spare the threats, then offer negotiation as a way out of the situation. There will always be people in the West who will take the bait. Third, once the negotiations begin, do not give in an inch. Your interlocutors will eventually offer you part of what you asked for. But even then, do not sign. Insist on more, and they will accept. When you have received half or 2/3 of what never belonged to you, you can consider yourself a Soviet diplomat. Once again, we need to be clear. It is not the business of the United States of America or any other government to tell other countries when to hold elections and whether their leaders are legitimate. Make no mistake, only the Kremlin is interested in regime change in Kyiv. Question 2. What's the difference between a peace and a truce in the context of this war? Definitionally, a truce is a short-term, informal cessation of hostilities, whereas peace between two sovereign nations is usually solidified as a long-term effort and achieved via bilateral formal agreements. Now, I'm no career ambassador, but it seems like you have to put guns down first before you can start picking up pens. We've seen continuously that only one side, the Ukrainians, has proposed ceasefires over and over again, and that the other side, the Russians, have exhibited no interest in actually doing that. Everyone who has studied Russia knows that this whole endeavor is a charade, and Russia's singular goal here is to use Kremlin-aligned leaders in Western countries to put pressure on Ukraine. Russia's traditional military cannot accomplish the territorial goals that were set out at the beginning of this 3-day operation almost 1,400 days ago, but unfortunately they have many other tools at their disposal. This brings us to question 3. Why, when our American populace, House, Senate, and institutions have moral clarity about the Russian invasion, do POTUS and those in his inner circle seem so inclined to favor Russia, an archetypical enemy of both the United States, the democratic Judeo-Christian values that our country was founded on, and the free world at large? That's a topic for another Ukraine brief, but it starts with following the money flows of multi-billion-dollar energy, banking, and financial entities, as well as anybody within the Kremlin's orbit. In other words, the Gazproms and Goldman Sachs of the world. This whole debacle is far from over, and we will do our best to keep up with it, as well as keep you informed. Today, the Ukrainian delegation is meeting with Witkoff and Kushner in Germany, although this podcaster doubts anything productive will come of it. If you have any questions or believe that we've missed the mark on something, please let us know in the comments. As always, we will leave a list of our sources in the description. In the meantime, thank you for being here. God bless America, and Slava Ukraini. Heroям slava.